Scream all you want, sweetie, but ain't nothing gonna stop this. Can you feel that? How deep I'm going? I'm making you my own little personal bitch right now. In fact, let me tell you something else. Before I'm done with you, you're gonna be begging me to fuck you. You'll be screaming so loud that merc bitch of yours might just even hear us. Let's see if we can't get her attention right now. Come on, let's hear it. Scream her name. Scream it.
V! They were groping every part of me, grabbing my tits, my ass, but finally, they weakened. The one holding my neck lost his grip, and I was able to swing free of the other, pinning my arms down. A pair of strong hands tried to grab me by the shoulders. I tried to kick, but my legs were still blanketed, so instead, I swatted and thrashed about, desperately trying to, "Judy, wake up!" My eyes snapped open, but I saw nothing but blackness. I continued to struggle, fearful that at any moment, the hack they had hit me with might paralyze me again. I was already blinded. If I couldn't move, I'd never get away. And V. How had they gotten a hold of a vocal sampling from her? I knew she wasn't close by. I had just screamed for her to help. Yet her voice sounded as if it were right next to me. "Judy, you're having a nightmare. It's just me." No, this couldn't be a nightmare. It was real. They were holding me down. But their hands had turned to nothing more than layers of cotton and polyester. My back wasn't pressed against the cement floor, but rather a creaky mattress. But there was still a pair of hands trying to grab me. No, it had to be real. Some sick fucking game they decided to play with me. "Please, Judy, wake up." I refused to believe that voice, even though I now knew it was being spoken right next to me. And the hands that were grabbing, holding me, were so familiar. They weren't even trying to hold me back. I screamed into the darkness as I finally awoke, gasping for breath. Something soft touched my arm, causing me to swat at it. Bed. I was lying on it, or rather, sitting up in it, drenched in sweat. The sheets had been tossed to the floor except for a small bit still draped over my feet. That same voice spoke again, just as close as it had been a moment earlier. "Judy, you're safe." V. She was here. I was safe. "V, I'm right here, baby. I'm gonna hold you, all right?" I nodded, but didn't feel anything. Why wasn't she pulling me into her arms? Had I struck her? Or recited something awful they'd made me say? Had she finally given up on me and left? Why wasn't she holding me? And then I realized from the desperate pawing on the mattress that she couldn't find me in the dark. "V, hold me." There she was, warm as always, safe. I was safe in her arms. "I got you. I got you." V pulled me onto her lap and rocked me back and forth, whispering the same words over and over into my ear. I was still heaving for breath, though at least my pulse was beginning to slow. So this was what it was like for V, to wake up and still be trapped in a nightmare, not knowing where she was or what was happening. It was horrifying, not being able to draw that line between what was real and what wasn't. And even though I was finally calming down, I was terrified that if I closed my eyes, I would find myself right back there again, surrounded and powerless. At least I wasn't crying, though I figured that was probably because of the sheer amount of adrenaline that had just been dumped into my bloodstream. V eventually stopped whispering and had resorted to gently shushing me every so often. Her arms never left me. I could feel them, I finally managed to say. "You're safe. It's over." "V? Yeah. Can you put a light on? I'm not liking the dark." It was a childish thing to ask for, But V only kissed my brow and shifted over to reach for her hollow. The room was briefly illuminated by the harsh white light emanating from the screen before it dimmed into a soothing blue glow. She tossed it onto the foot of the bed. "You want me to hold you again?" As much as I wanted to say yes, I couldn't lay there in her arms forever. I shook my head and sat up, pulling the blanket back onto the bed so I had something to cover myself with before curling my knees to my chest. V did the same, sitting cross-legged next to me. She waited patiently, giving me the time I needed. "It was so real," I explained. "Like I was back there all over again, just as helpless as before." "You're not back there again, and you're not helpless. You fought back as hard as you could. I know you did." "Still," I shook my head. "I could almost feel them on me, in me. And now everyone out there can feel that too, for a price. And V, there's nothing you need to say to that. I don't expect you to always know the right words. What the fuck do you say to something like that anyway?" I looked at V, feeling glad to have finally given her some relief. She was trying so hard for me, but at some point the truth was the truth. It might be brutal and unforgiving, but there was no escaping it. I was being circulated out there, and we both knew there was an audience discovering me right now. No words would take the sting away from that, and no amount of justice would ever erase what they had done. It wasn't fair to put all of that for V to solve for me. "V? Yeah?" V replied, her voice catching in her throat. I know what you were going to say earlier this morning. You tried to pull it back at the last second, but even if you'd managed to, I still would have known." I watched as her confusion slowly morphed into understanding. "Trust me." They were two simple words that lied at the core of everything. I didn't know how to trust. The truth? It could hurt, whereas lies could always be spun and controlled. Love? It had to be a two-way street. Why would I ever expect to get what I wanted if I wasn't giving it as well? V took a deep breath. It seems like those words trigger something in you, so I wanted to avoid saying them, but I still wanted you to know that you could have, that you still can. I know. Another long period of silence stretched between us. I knew what she was doing. A nagging voice in my ear told me it was no different from what I would have done to her. But V wasn't that calculating. That was me. She was only keeping the door open for me in case I wanted to talk about it. She wasn't baiting me into revealing something. Was she? God damn it. I hated not knowing. It honestly didn't start out all that bad. I'm not trying to justify anything Cindy did. It's just that I was getting to be that age anyway. I had some idea what went on down there. I had played around a little when I was supposed to be sleeping. Of course, I didn't know what I was back then, but it felt right when I was with her. Obviously did for her too. V nodded slowly. When did that change? I took a deep breath. When we left Laguna Bend, my abuelos tried real hard to make things the way they'd always been, but they couldn't. Place was teeming with crime just like it is now. Gangs everywhere, shootings at night that would wake me up, and it wasn't my room I was sleeping in, even if they kept trying to tell me it was bigger and better than the one I'd had. Maybe if the town hadn't been flooded and we could have stayed there, things never would have gotten as bad as they did. I didn't feel that fine line between telling the truth and holding pieces of it back. Not anymore. There didn't seem to be a point. She already had a ringside seat to the disaster my life had been, so I might as well put on a show and give her all the grisly details she could ask for. I already told you about how she got the apartment, pimping me out like my body was nothing more than her own private bank account. But, Judy, we don't have to talk about this right now in the middle of the night.
That's just what she wants you to believe. Look how much you're opening yourself up to her. You think there's anything beautiful inside of you that she's going to want to look at? You're an ugly, stinking mess.
That fucking voice. Once again, I pushed it away. But Jesus, even though V had told me I wasn't made any certain way, I really was screwed up. What kind of person had thoughts like that? V, I'm already splayed open. Might as well pull all of it apart and give you a good look at what I am. That at least earned me a small laugh, which helped to diffuse some of the tension that filled the room. I cleared my throat. By the time we moved in here, I'd been with her for a couple of years. Sure, I picked up some things, tricks, behaviors, and all that, but it wasn't until I saw just how much she needed me that I realized the power I had over her. I'd had it all wrong, always thinking she was the one in control. I may have still been just a kid, but I realized what I could do. She didn't stand a fucking chance against me. Power? V said, confused. What do you mean? How the fuck could I explain this? V, you remember a couple months back when I first asked you about the studio, freeing up some eddies for it? Yeah. Remember what you said about the whole thing, first time we talked about it? V recoiled as if I'd slapped her. Judy, I'm sorry that I told you it was a bad idea. No, that's not it. Don't you see? You told me no. Forget all the bullshit around that. Bottom line, I asked for something, and you told me no. And what did I do? I watched V intently, studying her expression as she tried to figure out where I was going with this, but her eyes didn't reflect any sudden epiphany. Instead, they remained confused, searching about for an answer she couldn't find. Finally, she gave up and shook her head. I sighed and braced myself. I did what I'd learned to always do. I fucking played you, V. As soon as I realized you weren't on board with the whole idea, I knew exactly how to get to you. Gave you the cold shoulder long enough that I knew you'd come back to me, apologizing and wanting to make things right. And even then, I still held out on the big guns until the right time came. Do you remember? You mean that morning? The puzzle was nearly complete, and I held the final piece. As soon as I handed it to her, V would finally, after nearly 3 years together, have a finished picture of who I was. Yes, V, you keep looking at me and seeing what you want to see. That sexy techie in the den with a glimmer in her eye and a heart of gold. But beneath that, I'm a stone-cold, calculating, manipulative bitch. Judy, don't say it's true. By the time we went to sleep that night, I knew I already had you. I could have even asked you right then and there to transfer the eddies, and I'm sure you would have done it. But what did I do? I held back, keeping you frustrated and feeling guilty until I thought you were at your most vulnerable. And then, when you did agree to the whole fucking thing, I rewarded you the best way I know how. I fucked your brains out. Don't you see? With me, you never had a chance. I had all the power. I waited for the shock to settle in. V was fiddling with the edge of the blanket, lost in thought. My nervousness grew with each second that passed. She had wanted me to be open with her, and had probably braced herself as much as anyone could, but how could you prepare yourself for the fact that the person you loved was so conniving and twisted? She couldn't. I'd just jabbed her in the heart with a knife, and even if it didn't tear her apart, it was a wound that wouldn't heal quickly. Judy, V finally said, returning her eyes to my own. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt to hear all of this. Guess it stands to reason that what's-her-name didn't Cindy. Yeah, I know her name. Quite well now, in fact. I'm simply choosing not to use it right now so I don't get pissed. But what I was trying to say was she didn't do you any favors, but you might be giving her a little too much credit. That, or you're not giving me enough. You really think I didn't know what you were doing? I stared back at V wide-eyed, unable to speak. Jesus, Judy, V chuckled to herself. You're not the first person to resort to the old roll-over in bed technique to stave someone off until later. Look, the way you're thinking about all this, yeah, it's pretty fucked up. Most people don't play that kind of long game with things, though I guess I guess with her, you were forced to. But the actions themselves, what you actually did, honestly, not all that terrible or out of the norm. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You can't just brush all this aside, V. It's not just that one example. I could think of plenty of other times I schemed my way with you to get what I want. Can't play it down as normal shit. And I'm not, V said, her tone bordering on admonishment. What I'm saying is you got a messed up way of thinking about things that ain't your fault. But nothing you've ever done has sent me running for the hills. Not yet, at least. V gave me a playful nudge, trying to lighten the mood, though it was no use. I still wasn't sure if she was really getting it. If she was really understanding how manipulative I could be. Look, I'm not a shrink, Jude. We're not going to get through all this tonight and somehow fix everything that you think is broken. Suppose it'll take time, but I want you to know that I still care about you, still love you. In fact, and I'm not making this shit up, I swear, but I love you even more now that you're showing me who you really are. I don't know how you can love someone who's lied to you every day since you first met them. I realized as V shifted closer and stuffed a pillow behind her back that my greatest fear had finally spilled from my lips. It had been festering inside of me for months, perhaps even years. Would she still love me? Does it matter how? V asked. I don't know. Think it should. I don't. Who gives a fuck how? I love you. And no matter how much you keep beating yourself up or pushing me away, ain't nothing gonna change that. Don't know what I gotta do to get it through that thick skull of yours. Maybe, just maybe, she was right. Why did it matter? All I had to do was look at V to see the point she was trying to get across. She'd lied to me as well, but had I stopped loving her? Maybe the better question was, what did I think of her after she'd finally spilled her secrets? I'd formed a shameful perception of her over time as being a thin-skinned gonk who was entirely dependent upon me to hold her together. The V sitting next to me didn't fit that mold at all. She hadn't flinched at a word I'd said. If anything, it seemed like many of my dark secrets weren't as big of a deal to her as I'd thought. She was caring, perceptive, and far stronger than I'd ever given her credit for. The answer was obvious. I loved her even more now that she was honest with me. Guess you're right. And I love you too, V. All of you. Which, I guess... Do you ever wonder if we're, meant for each other? Or that we just stumbled our way into this whole stinking mess and we've been trying to make it work ever since? V took a moment to consider the question. I think it's both. And yeah, I do wonder about that sometimes. A lot, actually. There's so much about us that's different. It can be pretty scary sometimes, I'm not gonna lie. But now, I feel like that's a good thing. I hope it is, at least. Couldn't stand being with someone like me. Me neither. I didn't realize what I'd said until V burst out into laughter. Apparently, I was wittier than I knew, but it felt good to smile again. I meant I couldn't stand being with someone like myself, gonk. Whatever you say, V winked. You feeling tired at all? No. You? I can stay up. Are you good talking with me some more? Or do you want to keep going on about how apparently neither one of us can stand me? Fuck, my cheeks hadn't hurt like this in so long. Even though I would soon dive back into the muddy waters of my past, It was still a moment worth cherishing. Ask away. Seems like you might have missed your calling at N54 News, though. V nudged me again, though her smile quickly faded. You said you were with Cindy for almost... Shit! God damn it, that fucking name just slipped right out, didn't it? Fuck it. You said you were with Cindy for almost 5 years. How did it end? The hint of fear in her voice was hard to miss. V had to be expecting the worst considering everything I'd told her so far. It wasn't anything bad, I assured her. In fact, it was actually something good. Big change of pace, I know. My abuelo... Fuck, I miss him. After all the arguing and awful shit I'd done, even ghosting him, he never gave up on me. He got in touch with an old neighbor chum of his who was living in a group home with some other Laguna Bend regulars. Alejandro. It was pure fucking luck I wasn't swimming in lace when he called, because if I had been, I shuddered at the thought. I'd often wondered where I would have ended up if I hadn't checked my holo that day. I wouldn't have been anyplace good, that was for sure. You decided to go? Yeah, I nodded. Cindy was barely holding it together, and I was spending most of my time providing for her, if I could find anyone who was willing to trade. It wasn't like anyone would employ a minor, so you can imagine what I had to offer up to get my hands on shit. Finally, I just woke up one day and had hit my limit with her. That's the only reason? V asked. 'Cause it sounds like you could have up and left a lot sooner. I probably could have. Thought about it a bunch of times, even packed up my shit and left for a couple of stints, though I always found my way back to her. It was only when I got his message. Oh, V, I wish you could have met my abuelo. It was one of my greatest regrets, not having saved the voicemail he'd left for me that day. Every so often, I could hear his voice in my head as though he were standing right next to me. But most of the time, I struggled to remember what he sounded like. It felt like a terrible betrayal of his love for me to be forgotten. And my abuela, at least it wasn't her fault she had forgotten. I sighed. I'd gone back to her place after failing to score something for us. Was about to pass out on the couch next to her when my holo went off. For some reason, I ignored the call, but I later checked the message that had been left. It was from him. I rubbed at my temples as though my head were pounding in pain. His voice. He was so sad, V. So worried about me. Guess it finally shook something loose inside of me. V rubbed my back, gently raking her nails against my skin the way I always enjoyed. He loved you. He did, I sniffled. It's funny. Never saw him as a parent until that day. I wish I would have been nicer to them. Judy, you can't... No, I know that, V. I'm not beating myself up over it. Just look at how much they cared about me and can't help but wonder how different things would have been if Cindy's folks had been even half as good as my abuelos were. How different indeed. I'd pondered it over the years, the different paths my life could have taken if I hadn't met her. Would I have finally made some real friends, or still been bullied and forced to play by myself? Would I have paid attention in school and done something better with my life, or joined with the Valentinos and hit the streets? Would Evelyn have died? Would I have met V? I wiped the wetness from my eyes. Anyway, you can imagine how she reacted when I told her I was leaving for good. Let me guess, V quirked an eyebrow. She begged you to stay until she got the point, then spat in your face and told you to get out. See where I get it from? I snorted. That fucking bitch. She did such a number on me. Had me questioning Alejandro's motives every second of the day, thinking he was just out to get in my pants. V eyed me suspiciously. No. I quickly cut V off before she could even start down that absurd path. The guy was pushing 80 and wasn't chromed up at all. Think if he'd sprung a boner, it would have put him in an early grave. V drew her hand away and curled her lips in disgust. Ew. Grow up, I groaned, giving V a gentle nudge of my own. But, in all seriousness, He was a real sweetheart. Helped me get clean and pulled my hair out of the toilet like someone else I know. But Cindy left her mark on me. Made it so I thought he was always out for something, that everyone was. Carried that mentality with me when I left and moved back in here. Wrecked one disastrous relationship after another until I eventually just stopped trying and accepted what I was. And what was that? V asked, her eyes narrowing. I shrugged and gave V the only answer I could think of. The only one I knew to be true. A monster. The room went quiet. I looked around the bedroom, studying the various trinkets and posters scattered about. It was hard to make out any detail against the dim glow being cast by V's hollow. I didn't know what time it was, but it felt like the sun wouldn't be up for hours. My mouth had turned dry at some point, probably around the time I told V how my entire life had become a fucked up shit show. But it had helped to talk about it, knowing that I was safe with her. The nightmare was distant now, most of it having fragmented into pieces I would likely still remember in the morning, but that I could at least digest. V broke the silence. I guess I know now, at least. Know what? I asked. Why you do this to yourself? Why you keep beating yourself down and saying shit like, I am a monster, or I was made? V looked away from me. She was chewing on her lip as though she were trying to decide something. What was she thinking about? Probably everything. It was a lot to unpack. Her eyes found their way back to me before I could ask. I want to tell you something about myself. I think it might help with some of what you're going through now. What we're going through. Do you want me to get you some water first? I nodded, watching as V climbed off the bed. What did she want to tell me? My mind raced with possibilities, each one becoming more unsettling than the last. Had she relapsed, or worse, gotten hooked on something much more serious? Were we broke and about to get thrown out of our place? What horrible secret had she kept that she'd waited until this moment to reveal? I wasn't sure I wanted to know, but the fact that V trusted me enough to reveal something she'd obviously kept a secret was enough to push away the sense of dread that had been trying to creep over me. I would do exactly as she had done for me. I would listen. V? She stopped at the doorway. I do trust you. V smiled. I know you believe that, and I know a part of you deep down really does, too. We're gonna get the rest of you there, Judy. It'll take time, but I believe in you. My eyes stung as V walked out of the bedroom and into the darkness beyond. I'd done it again and hadn't even realized it. Lied. And even if it was one I desperately wanted to believe, V was right. It would take time.